The Devil in the Deep, the doomed voyage of the whaleship. There are stories the sea keeps, rotting quietly in her dark, salt-soaked belly. Stories men whisper in taverns, or dream of in fevered sleep. One of the most gruesome ever to rise from the depths is the voyage of the Essex, a Nantucket whaleship swallowed not by storm, but by the wrath of a monstrous leviathan and by the gnawing madness that creeps into a starving man's mind. The Essex sailed from Nantucket in August of 1819, a 238-ton ship with a seasoned captain, George Pollard, JRB, and a crew of 20. Their mission? To harvest the oceans for sperm whales and return with thousands of gallons of oil. The crew was young, many no more than boys. Among them, Owen Chase, the first mate, Owen Coffin, the captain's own cousin, and Thomas Nickerson, a teenage cabin boy, who would later describe the voyage as a descent into hell. The journey began with unease. A squall struck early and violently, damaging the ship's top-gallant sail. Sailors, superstitious by nature, took it as a bad omen. But they pressed on, eventually reaching the South Pacific. Whales were scarce, as if driven away by something darker, something waiting. On November 20, 1820, in a remote patch of ocean over 2,000 miles west of South America, the men of the Essex found themselves, not the hunters but the hunted. A massive sperm whale, said to be over 85 feet long, emerged from the deep. It stared at the ship, almost intelligently. Then it rammed the vessel once, then again, deliberately, an act never witnessed before or since. Wood splintered. Water rushed in. The ship groaned like a dying beast. Within hours, the Essex was gone, claimed by the Pacific. Left with only 3 small whaleboats, the crew floated in a watery wilderness. They carried minimal provisions, hardtack, a few casks of water, and salted meat. They drifted into an unforgiving emptiness, where the sun blistered skin to parchment, and thirst made the mind hallucinate mirages of rain and rescue. They first hoped to reach the Marquesas Islands, only 1,200 miles away. But fear of cannibals on those shores persuaded them to turn east towards South America, a journey nearly twice as long. By December, the food was gone. Men began to die, their bodies gaunt, their eyes glassy. What? The ocean didn't take, starvation did. When the first body fell cold, they hesitated, but not for long. The flesh was cut away with knives, salted by the sea air, and eaten. This was not barbarism, they told themselves. This was necessity. The line between human and beast blurred with each bite. At night, they huddled together in boats soaked with the blood of their shipmates. The wind keened through the sails like the cry of drowned souls. Weeks passed. Men prayed to die and feared it. On January 20th, in Captain Pollard's boat, 4 remained: Pollard, his young cousin Owen Coffin, and 2 others. They drew lots. Someone had to die to feed the rest. Pollard, horror-struck, offered to take the boy's place. Coffin refused. His fate, he said, was sealed. He was shot, butchered, and consumed. His flesh kept the others alive a few more days. In Chase's boat, the story was much the same. More deaths, more bodies cut open like livestock. Nickerson, still just a boy, watched grown men gnaw rib bones and fight over marrow. Their eyes became hollow lanterns, glowing with madness. The line between man and meat had dissolved. One by one, their crewmates fell, and with each death, the unthinkable became the expected. They bled the bodies dry, carved meat from limbs, roasted organs over crude fires. Fingers trembled not with grief, but anticipation. It was not madness that set in. Madness would have offered relief. First Mate Owen Chase later wrote, "We suffered the most dreadful and lingering torments. We began to look upon each other with horrid thoughts. The sea, once a livelihood, became a graveyard. When they finally reached the barren Henderson Island, hope briefly flickered, but it was a cruel trick. The island offered scant food and no water. Most of the crew set sail again. 3 men stayed behind, wisely choosing the lifeless rocks over the horror to come. Soon, one of the men died. The survivors, skeletal and hollow-eyed, made a decision that no prayer could cleanse. They butchered his body and cooked the flesh. What began as revulsion became ritual. He died in the night. In the morning, we stripped him. There was no debate. Hunger had already passed judgment. Survivor recollection. It was not madness that crept into our minds. Madness would have been merciful. We weighed flesh like cuts of beef, with hands that once offered handshakes. The silence between us grew unbearable, punctuated only by the sound of chewing. Then came the most terrifying moment of all. In one boat, 4 men remained. There were no more natural deaths to wait for. So, they invoked a brutal seafaring tradition, drawing lots to decide who would die to feed the others. Owen Coffin, just 18 years old, and cousin to Captain Pollard, drew the short straw. Pollard, heartbroken, offered to take his place. Coffin refused. He was executed by his friend Charles Ramsdell. I looked into Owen's eyes when the lot was drawn. He did not cry. He did not plead. He nodded. I raised the pistol with hands that shook for a reason. I will carry until I die. Coffin was bled, butchered, eaten. Silence fell over the boat. What little humanity remained dissolved into the salt air. By the time rescue came nearly 3 months after the sinking, 8 men remained. 3 survivors were rescued from Chase's boat by the Indian. Captain Pollard's boat, discovered days later by the Dauphin, held 2 barely living men surrounded by gnawed human bones. They had kept them, believing they might need to feed again. Back on land, the world recoiled. Cannibalism was the stuff of nightmares and savage myth. But the Essex survivors were not condemned, they were pitied. Most believed they had done what any man would, given the same horrors. But the ordeal left scars. Captain Pollard never sailed a whaleship again. He spent his final years walking the beaches of Nantucket, haunted by his cousin's face. He reportedly fasted each year on the anniversary of Owen Coffin's death. Owen Chase wrote a book about the voyage, but never escaped the ghosts of those months at sea. He suffered terrible headaches, night terrors, and eventually went mad, locking food away in the attic out of a starvation-born paranoia. Thomas Nickerson, the cabin boy, never told his story until old age. It was found in a trunk after his death, too horrible for him to speak aloud. The tale of the Essex reached the ears of a young sailor named Herman Melville, who wove it into legend as Moby-Dick. But his was a sanitization, a mythic allegory. The truth was darker. This was not a tale of man vs. whale. It was man vs. the abyss. Man stripped of all civility, dining on the dead beneath the sunless sea. It was the ocean's cruelest test. How far will you go when the world turns to water, and the only meat left to eat walks and weeps beside you? For some, rescue brought no peace. Chase, though physically restored, was haunted. He returned to whaling, but his mind was never whole. In later years, his daughter found food hidden in the attic of his home: salted meats, biscuits, dried fruit stockpiled against an invisible hunger. He would die tormented, never escaping the ghost of starvation. Captain Pollard returned to sea aboard the Brothers, only to suffer another shipwreck. Afterward, disgraced and broken, he took a job as a night watchman, the lowest of the low for a former captain. He fasted each November 20th in mourning, his soul marooned in memory. I can never talk about the Essex. I would rather be forgotten than remembered for what we did to survive. Ramsdell, burdened with the blood of his friend Owen Coffin, lived out a haunted life. None of them truly came home. By 1887, all survivors were dead. The tale was fading from public memory, reduced to maritime whispers. But then came Herman Melville. Inspired by Owen Chase's memoir, The Narrative of the Most Extraordinary and Distressing Shipwreck of the Whale Ship Essex, Melville wrote Moby-Dick, a novel that turned a terrifying truth into a sweeping parable of obsession and vengeance. But Melville only hinted at the real horror. His white whale was a metaphor. The Essex was flesh. Melville's book floundered in his lifetime, selling just a few thousand copies. But over the years, it found its place as one of the great works of American literature. And with it came renewed interest in the dark truth that inspired it. Historian Nathaniel Philbrooks, In the Heart of the Sea, and its cinematic adaptation, dragged cannibalism back into the light of modern consciousness. Yet what lingers most is not the fame of a book, but the echo of what happened at sea, that moment when men, once bound by duty and camaraderie, turned on the dead to keep death at bay. And perhaps more chillingly, they survived. Thanks for diving into the shadows with me, you curious, twisted, and beautifully eerie souls. My name is Penny Flick with Kreep-ish. Share your thoughts below. We're just scratching the surface of true crime, history's mysteries, and all things hauntingly fascinating. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and always remember, the truth is stranger than fiction.